In our family portrait hanging in the hallway, I'm the blurry figure on the edge, almost cropped out, an afterthought. That photo perfectly captured my existence in the Morgan household. I was the middle child, the unremarkable one, sandwiched between my brilliant older brother Michael and my charming younger sister Emma. Jessica, move out of the way, was practically my mother's catchphrase growing up in our suburban Chicago home. I heard it when Michael needed space for his science projects that eventually won him national recognition. I heard it when Emma needed the living room to practice her dance routines that made my parents beam with pride. I was 13 when I truly understood my place, or lack thereof, in my family. It was my birthday, a crisp October day with leaves the color of fire outside our windows. I'd spent weeks dropping hints about a book I wanted, a fantasy novel my English teacher had recommended. That morning, I came downstairs, heart fluttering with anticipation. Mom was at the stove making pancakes, Michael's favorite, not mine. Dad was helping Emma with her history project due that week. "Good morning," I said, hovering in the doorway. Mom glanced up briefly. "Jessica, can you set the table? We're running late." I stood there, waiting for the happy birthday that never came. I set the table, my movements mechanical, a strange numbness spreading through my chest. Breakfast passed with conversation about Michael's upcoming debate tournament and Emma's dance recital. Not a single mention of my birthday. Not a card, not a present, not even acknowledgement. That evening, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd somehow become invisible. I pinched my arm hard, watching the skin turn white then red. Still here. Still real. Just, unseen. The next morning, as I was leaving for school, Mom called out, "Oh, Jessica. I almost forgot." She handed me a gift card to a bookstore, the plastic still attached to the paper backing like it had been grabbed from a grocery store rack as an afterthought. "Happy belated birthday. Sorry, we've been so busy with Michael's tournament prep." I took it without a word, the gesture somehow worse than being forgotten entirely. I was worth a last-minute gift card and a half-hearted apology. Michael was worth weeks of preparation and rearranged schedules. At school, I was just as invisible. Not popular enough to be noticed, not troubled enough to warrant attention. I floated through hallways like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, which wasn't often, but in Ms. Winter's English class, something different happened. We were studying Jane Eyre, and when I raised my hand to answer a question about the protagonist's resilience, Ms. Winters really looked at me, as I spoke. "That's an incredibly insightful observation, Jessica," she said when I finished. "You have a remarkable way of understanding character motivation." The praise felt like water after a drought. I blinked back unexpected tears and straightened in my seat. After class, she asked me to stay behind. "Have you ever considered joining the school newspaper? We need someone with your analytical skills." I hadn't. No one had ever suggested I might be good at anything before. That afternoon, instead of going straight home to a house where no one would notice my absence anyway, I went to my first newspaper meeting. The editor, a senior named Diane, handed me a notebook. "We need someone to cover the school board's budget cuts. Think you can handle it?" For the first time in my life, someone was asking what I could do, not telling me to get out of the way. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I can handle it." That night at dinner, I mentioned the newspaper. Michael was talking about his debate win, Emma about her solo in the upcoming recital. I waited for a pause and said, "I joined the school newspaper today." Dad nodded absently. "That's nice, honey. Michael, tell us more about the competition." And just like that, I was invisible again. But something had changed inside me. At the newspaper, I had an identity. I was Jessica Morgan, reporter. Not just the forgettable middle child that I wrote my article on the budget cuts, interviewing teachers and administrators, researching previous budgets. When it was published, Ms. Winters put a copy on my desk with a note, "Exceptional work. You have a gift." I folded that note carefully and put it in my wallet, where I could touch it whenever I needed to remember I existed. At home, the pattern continued. Michael's college applications dominated dinner conversations. Emma's dance competitions required weekend trips that I wasn't even invited to join. "You'll be fine staying with Grandma," Mom would say, not bothering to ask if I had plans or preferences, but at school, at the newspaper, I was building something they couldn't see or touch. Something that was entirely mine. Each article I wrote became a brick in the foundation of a new identity, one that didn't depend on their recognition to exist. By sophomore year, I was features editor. By junior year, editor-in-chief. My byline appeared in local papers when our stories got picked up. None of this registered at home. "Jessica, clear your stuff off the dining table," Mom would say, sweeping aside my marked-up drafts to make room for Michael's college brochures or Emma's recital programs. Each dismissal, each oversight, each time they looked through me instead of at me, it all became fuel. I stopped seeking their approval and started planning my escape. If I was going to be invisible, I would use that invisibility like a superpower. I would work harder, reach further, build higher than anyone expected from the forgettable Morgan daughter. The pain of being unseen never went away. Some nights I cried silently into my pillow, a child's desperate longing for parental love still alive beneath my growing determination. But by morning, those tears would crystallize into resolve. I would make myself impossible to ignore. Not for them, but for me. Because I was starting to understand a fundamental truth: being seen by others matters far less than being able to see yourself clearly, and I was finally coming into focus. Senior year arrived with a flurry of college applications. Michael was already at Princeton, setting the bar impossibly high. Emma, though only a freshman, was already being scouted by performing arts schools. Meanwhile, I applied to colleges in secret, using the money I'd saved from my part-time job at the local bookstore to pay application fees. My guidance counselor, Mr. Patel, was the only one who knew my plans. "These are ambitious choices, Jessica," he said, reviewing my list. "Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Northwestern." "I know," I replied, my voice steady despite the doubt churning in my stomach. "Your grades and test scores are exceptional," he continued. "And your work on the newspaper is impressive. But these schools look for more than academics." I slid a folder across his desk. Inside were the awards my newspaper articles had won in national competitions, letters of recommendation from teachers, and the acceptance letter to a prestigious summer journalism program I'd attended by taking the train alone to Northwestern, while my family vacationed in Florida without me. Mr. Patel's eyebrows rose as he flipped through the documents. "You've been busy," he said finally, a new respect in his voice. "No one was watching," I replied simply. It made it easier to focus. When the early decision letter from Columbia arrived in December, I stood in the driveway clutching it, heart hammering against my ribs. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I tore it open there, unwilling to share this moment with a family that had shared so little with me. "Dear Ms. Morgan, we are pleased to offer you admission." The world tilted slightly. I had to lean against the mailbox to steady myself. "Columbia. Full scholarship." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, not just of joy, but of vindication. All those hours, all that invisible work, had led to this moment, that night at dinner. I cleared my throat during a rare lull in conversation about Emma's upcoming recital. "I got into Columbia today," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Full scholarship. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's fork paused, halfway to his mouth. My mother blinked rapidly, as if trying to bring me into focus. Columbia? She repeated. When did you apply to Columbia? 3 months ago, I said. I applied to several schools. But we haven't discussed any of this, my father said, his brow furrowed. We need to talk about whether that's the right choice. Princeton has been so good for Michael, and I've already accepted, I interrupted, something I rarely did. And it's a full scholarship. You won't have to pay anything. Another silence, heavier this time. Well, my mother said finally, her voice unnaturally bright. That's wonderful, Jessica. Columbia is a good school. Great school, I corrected quietly. Of course, she amended quickly. We're very proud. The words should have meant everything. Instead, they rang hollow, too little, too late. I nodded and returned to my dinner, the victory somehow both sweeter and more bitter than I'd imagined. The months that followed brought a strange shift in our household dynamics. Suddenly, my parents wanted to know about my plans, my classes, my future. They mentioned Columbia to friends with a pride that felt foreign and unearned. I answered their questions politely but briefly, unwilling to give them access to the parts of myself I'd protected for so long. On graduation day, they took photos of me in my cap and gown, smiling broadly for the camera. Our Columbia-bound journalist, my father introduced me to his colleagues. I smiled and shook hands, playing the role of the dutiful daughter while inwardly marveling at how quickly they'd rewritten our family history. In their new version, they'd always supported my writing, always known I was destined for greatness. That summer, I interned at the Chicago Tribune, commuting downtown on the L train while Emma attended a prestigious dance camp that my parents drove her to every morning. Some patterns didn't change, but I was changing. Each byline, each editor's praise, each source who trusted me with their story, they all reinforced what I was slowly coming to believe, that my worth wasn't determined by my family's ability to see it. The night before I left for New York, I packed my bags alone. My mother poked her head in once to ask if I needed anything, but seemed relieved when I said no. As I folded my clothes into my suitcase, I found the note Ms. Winters had given me years ago, now worn at the creases from being unfolded and refolded countless times. Exceptional work. You have a gift. I tucked it into my journal, a reminder of the first person who had truly seen me. There would be others now, professors, editors, peers who would value what I could do, who would see me clearly without the distorting lens of family dynamics. The next morning, my father loaded my bags into the car for the drive to the airport. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at our house, the place where I'd been a ghost for 18 years. Ready for your big adventure? My mother asked. From the front seat, her voice overly cheerful, I turned away from the window, facing forward. I've been ready for a long time, I said quietly, and as the house disappeared behind us, I felt something unexpected, not just the anticipation of freedom, but a curious lightness. I was leaving behind not just a place, but an identity, the invisible daughter. Ahead lay the chance to be seen on my own terms, to build a life where I was not just visible, but valued. Columbia wasn't just my destination. It was my liberation. New York City embraced me in a way my family never had. At Columbia, I thrived in the journalism program, my professors recognizing what my parents had missed, that I had not just talent, but a fierce determination born from years of invisibility. Your writing has an unusual perspective, my feature writing professor told me after class one day. You see the overlooked angles, the stories others miss. Of course I did. I'd spent my life being the overlooked angle, the missed story, while my classmates struggled with homesickness. I bloomed in my newfound freedom. I joined the university paper, then landed a coveted internship at the New York Times the summer after freshman year. My first byline in the Times, a feature on undocumented restaurant workers that took months of building trust and gathering stories, ran on the front page of the Sunday section. I sent a copy to my parents. My mother called, her voice bright with a pride that still felt foreign to me. "Everyone's talking about it," she said. "Mrs. Hendricks from next door asked if you were our Jessica. Dad's showing it to everyone at work." I listened, a familiar hollowness expanding in my chest. Now that others were impressed, now that my name carried weight, suddenly I was their Jessica. "That's nice," I said, the same response they'd given my achievements for years. After sophomore year, I was offered a paid position at a digital news startup. The salary was enough that I didn't return home for summer or holidays, using the excuse of work. In truth, I couldn't bear to slip back into invisibility, to feel myself fading at that dining table where I'd spent so many silent meals. By graduation, I had job offers from 3 major publications. I chose the most prestigious, a senior reporter position covering politics that normally went to journalists with years more experience. "You're a unicorn," my editor said when I accepted. "Your age with your level of talent and drive." Not a unicorn, I thought. Just someone who learned early that no one would hand me anything, that I had to build it all myself. The years that followed were a blur of ambition realized. Feature articles led to investigative pieces. Investigative pieces led to awards. Awards led to a book deal at 26, an exposé on corruption in the pharmaceutical industry that became a New York Times bestseller and was optioned for a film. Through it all, my contact with my family remained minimal. Obligatory calls on birthdays and holidays. Brief visits where conversations stayed safely on the surface. They followed my career through Google Alerts and social media, proudly sharing my articles and appearances as if they'd had any part in my success. I built a life they couldn't have imagined for me, a penthouse apartment in Manhattan, my name recognized in journalistic circles, financial security beyond what either of my parents had achieved. I dated occasionally but kept people at a careful distance, the habit of self-protection too deeply ingrained to easily abandon. Then came the Pulitzer. I was 30 when I won for a series on human trafficking that took me undercover for months. The ceremony was in New York, and for the first time, I invited my family to attend. They came, all of them. Michael from his corporate law office in Boston, Emma from her moderately successful dance career in Los Angeles, my parents looking older than I remembered, more gray, more tentative. We met for dinner the night before the ceremony at an exclusive restaurant where the maitre d' greeted me by name. I watched their eyes widen as we were escorted to the best table, as people stopped by to congratulate me, as the chef came out personally to recommend dishes. "This is quite a life you've built, Jessica," my father said, looking around with a mixture of pride and something else, perhaps regret. "Yes," I agreed simply. "It is. We always knew you were special," my mother said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't respond either. The rewriting of history again, the convenient forgetting of all those years I'd been invisible. Michael raised his glass. "To Jessica," he said. "The most successful Morgan of us all." They all drank to that, and I saw it then, the shift in their eyes. I was no longer the forgettable middle child. I was Jessica Morgan, Pulitzer Prize winner, best-selling author, the daughter whose name opened doors and impressed neighbors. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. Their recognition, so desperately wanted for so many years, now meant almost nothing. I'd outgrown the need for it somewhere along the way. At the ceremony the next day, as I accepted the prize and gave my speech, I looked out at my family in the audience. They were beaming, clapping harder than anyone, finally, seeing me, but the most powerful realization wasn't their newfound ability to see me. It was that somewhere in the years of building my career, my life, my identity, I had stopped needing them to. I had become visible to myself. And in the end, that was the only recognition that truly mattered. The morning after the Pulitzer ceremony, I invited my family to my apartment, a space none of them had seen before. As they stepped into my penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, their expressions told me everything. This wasn't just success, this was a level of achievement that forced them to reckon with how profoundly they had underestimated me. "This is incredible, Jessica," my father said, moving slowly through the space, taking in the modern art on the walls, the custom bookshelves filled with first editions and translations of my book in dozens of languages. My mother touched things gingerly, as if afraid they might disappear. "You've done so well for yourself," she said, her voice tinged with wonder and something that sounded almost like apology. I made coffee in my kitchen while they explored, watching them through the open concept layout. Michael examined my awards shelf, where the Pulitzer now sat alongside other journalism prizes. Emma stood by the windows, looking out at a view that cost more than our childhood home. "When did all this happen?" my mother asked as I handed her a cup of coffee. "I mean, we knew you were doing well, but this is beyond what you imagined for me?" I finished for her. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Yes." I sat down across from them in my living room, feeling strangely calm. For years, I'd imagined confronting them about my invisibility, rehearsing angry speeches in my head. But sitting there, successful beyond anyone's expectations, I found those prepared words unnecessary. "It happened gradually," I said instead. "One story at a time. One opportunity at a time." "We should have paid more attention," my father said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "To your writing, to your ambitions." I studied him, the new lines around his eyes, the slump in shoulders. That one seemed so imposing. "Yes," I agreed simply. "You should have." A heavy silence fell. No excuses, no defenses. Just acknowledgement. "I used to dream about this moment," I continued, surprising myself with my candor. "About showing you all what I'd become, making you regret overlooking me." Emma looked down at her hands. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "And now?" my mother asked quietly. I considered the question, looking around at my life, the physical manifestations of my success, yes, but also thinking of the confidence I'd built, the voice I'd found, the impact my work had made. "Now I realize that this wasn't about you at all," I said finally. "Everything I've built, it wasn't to prove something to you. It was to prove something to myself." My father's eyes filled with tears, something I'd never seen before. "We failed you," he said simply. "You did," I agreed, the words neither angry nor accusatory, just factual. "But in failing me, you gave me something unexpected. You forced me to find my own strength." Later that day, as I walked them to the elevator, my mother lingered behind. "The others. I don't expect you to forgive us," she said quietly. "But I hope you know that we're proud of you. Not because of the prizes or this apartment, but because of who you've become despite us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd missed before, regret, deep and genuine. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. After they left, I stood in my quiet apartment, feeling a strange sense of closure. The recognition I'd once craved had finally come, but it no longer defined me. Somewhere along the way, the invisible girl had not only become visible, she had become powerful in her own right. That evening, I sat at my desk and began writing a new story, not an investigative piece or a political exposé, but something more personal. "The Invisible Daughter," I typed, and then paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't a story of victimhood or even vindication. It was a story of transformation, of how being unseen had taught me to truly see others, how being unheard had made me listen for the quietest voices, how being forgotten had made me remember what truly mattered. As I wrote deep into the night, I realized that my family's greatest gift to me had been their inattention. In that empty space, I had built something entirely my own, not just a career or a home, but an identity forged through my own efforts, shaped by my own hands. The invisible daughter had become a woman impossible to ignore. Not because she demanded attention, but because she no longer needed it to know her own worth, and that, I realized as I typed the final words of my story, was the most powerful success of all.